Welcome to episode 457 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and apologies on not making my Fed headlines after that 0-0 draw with Getafe last night, but I did get home late from work where it would have been the early AM until you saw it in front of you, and I also didn't feel like there'd be enough to say after that match against Getafe to both do 5 headlines and then have enough to talk about here on the pod. So fortunately, the good news is I have no worries that we'll have enough to talk about for the 35 to 55 minutes, Kevin. Because returning to the show again is Kevin Williams. So I know you were tired in Portugal. I'm assuming it's not so bad other than having to watch Barca Getafe 0-0, which I mean, I think we're going to get into it, but it might have been, I wouldn't say the worst game of the season, but I think it was the hardest. I don't know. I had worked 10 hours. I'm giving you time to giggle it over, but I had worked like 10, 12 hours and I watched, came home and I felt punished. It was a punishment to watch that game because it wasn't even bad. It wasn't even like they got ripped apart by Real Madrid. It was like, wow, this game just won't end. I know it's going to end 0-0 because like somebody had spoiled it. So I was like, how do I have to get to 0-0? I have to finish this game. And I'm taking notes and I'm like, I don't care about any of this. It was tough. It was tough. I always care, Kevin, but I did not care yesterday.
Um, well, you know who I feel the worst for those three dudes who have climbed the tree to watch the match.
Yeah.
These three guys on a tree, they're like, "This
Well,
is terrible.
they're still up there waiting for a goal. They are. They're
We
sitting
did
there
all
like, there's something's coming.
we climbed the tree with our beer.
Yeah.
This is what we get." I
Yeah.
mean, your five headlines would be: "It sucked, this really sucked, my lord, this sucked," and "Ooh," right?
Yeah.
Five headlines right there. I mean, look, I you know nobody takes pleasure in being right when they say bad things are going to happen. But I mean, many people, you and I included, said, "I'm not so sure about this Xavi thing." You don't want to be the one to say, "I told you so." But everything that has been predicted is coming to pass. He's in over his head. He doesn't know what to do with his roster with European football. Well, past tense. He lucked into Liga by having a desultory Madrid, sits around for a while and suddenly wake up. And hey, don't forget, Barcelona could still lose the. I mean, it's just not outside the realm that they could choke it up and give up this lead. So I feel like I can't think of a worse team that will possibly win Liga in going back to my memory is of La Liga starting like the late '90s, right? I can't think of a worse team that will maybe win the whole thing. And I thought that the Getafe match pointed out exactly every last thing wrong with Xavi's team. I mean, no one knows what to do with the ball. There's nowhere to put the ball when someone gets it. And people snark about, oh, you know, the only player who can shape a pass is Gavi, but shape a pass to where? No one knows where they want to be. Lewandowski's out for hot dogs somewhere. I mean, Rafinha is trying to be half price Dembele. It's like nobody knows what they wanted to do or how to do it, and so nothing happens. And you know, you had one opponent with nothing to play for who held them to a draw. Then you had Getafe, who is down your relegation. And the only reason I would like for them not to be relegated is because that means Espanyol will be, which would be even better. Ideally, they would both leave, but that's not likely. So, I mean, and mind you, the misses by Rafinha and Balde were both criminal. But typical of this team, it's just a mess. And someone said to me, "Oh, you never have anything good to say about this team," and I said, "Because there is nothing good to say about this team." I mean, if there was something good to say, I mean, I would say it. But I mean, and look, they're bringing Messi back next year to play in Espanyol's old stadium, right? Which probably still reeks of parakeet crap. It's like there's nothing good, but there's no money. There's this almost 8 million over 19 years for what exactly? I mean, it's like there's nothing good about
Hmm.
the club right now or the team. I mean, the only Femini is awesome, but guys like, oh, women football, derf, derf, derf. I mean, Femini is the only good thing about FC Barcelona right now.
And handball,
Crazy.
and handball, and the Baloncesto did beat Real Madrid yesterday, so there's stuff going on. But okay, so we are going to end with the Laporta on today's show, the Laporta press conference from today. So for those just for a programming note,
Cannons, bombers, coolers,
yeah,
storm the ramparts.
right. But all right, so you hit a lot of points that I want to just add even more context to, um, because I think the Xavi one is the biggest one. So I'm going to do that one last. First and foremost, if I think one of the reasons why Getafe was so rough was to the point that you made about the Girona match before and El Clasico before that, because this is the first time that the team was held scoreless in 3 straight games for the first time since April of 2008. So it's been a long time since it was 3 straight matches without a goal to talk about. Because again, with my 5 headlines, at least one of those headlines is always one of the goals, right? And if they score 3 goals, then I get 2 headlines through 3 goals, and it works out, right? But what you also said too about the league is interesting because don't look now, but it's not even Real Madrid in the rearview mirror. It's also Atletico Madrid because Atleti are just 2 points behind Real Madrid, and Atleti have not lost in the league since January 8th, which was the 1-0 loss to Barcelona. So they did lose Real Madrid in the Copa del Rey in that time, but who hasn't lost Real Madrid in the Copa del Rey? Not Barcelona. Now okay, when I say good news, I have some good news. Okay, it's not all bad. So yeah. If there are nice things to say, which is the return of Frankie De Jong and Pedri against Atletico Madrid for a team that, as you said, I think psychologically they're in the doldrums right now. I mean, limping to the finish line is an absolute understatement. Where by say limping would mean that they're going to get there, right? I think against Getafe, they showed you that Real Madrid does and Atletico Madrid have pathways to win the Liga still with 10 games remaining and 11 points behind and what is 13 for Atletico Madrid. Like there is a path for them forward and Barcelona can limp to the finish line. However, with Pedri and Frankie De Jong, this team has been different than they were the last few weeks. They, as
Yes.
you mentioned too, with Dembele, Christensen, Frankie De Jong, and Pedri, I sound like a broken record because they have not come back yet. But at least with even Pedri back, because from yesterday's game, there are different games. I don't know how much you've been following the different things I've said, but there are different games where I go, okay, Dembele was the biggest miss in that game. Or I believe it was, I mean, I could say actually Real Madrid, the El Clasico, it felt like Christensen was the biggest miss in that game, where I can point to certain moments, certain games. We'll go with Christensen in for Alonso in that game. I think that first half goal doesn't happen and it's 0-0 at halftime. And now you're talking about a different halftime speech, a whole different setup starting the second half. And you have Christensen instead of Alonso, right? And then there are other games,
Collapse.
right? And there are other games where Rafinha has put up absolute stinkers. Where I go, if Dembele is in place of Rafinha in that game, just as a 1-for-1 swap, it's a different result. And yesterday, it was odd yesterday because Busquets, Kessie, and Gabi. I think the trio yesterday, Gabi in the early yellow was kind of not helpful for him, but those three I didn't think did anything particularly wrong. But Pedri's influence was lacking in that what they did wrong with it is what they did not do. As in the passing chart, like the passing metrics between Gabi and Kessie were non-existent. Like there was no string. It was no like it didn't exist, right? There was no chemistry, no cohesion whatsoever. Barcelona were working, I mean, I guess vertically, but even horizontally, like they were not finding success in the middle parts of the field, which against a low block like that, against five at the block and five at the back, and we'll talk about again. Xavi's my last point to this, so I'm getting there in a second. But just in terms of that game, again, like was the midfield bad? No, they were non-existent. They were not there, and so for De Jong and Pedri to come back for Atletico Madrid, they could not come back at a more important time because even if Barcelona draws Atletico Madrid 0-0, 1-1, that goes a long way to winning the title. And this team can also look very different with those two in tow. So my positive or silver lining is that there is this world, Kevin, where we have seen the worst of Barcelona this season with the return of at least those two. I mean, Pedri even more so than De Jong, just because of
Yes.
he. I mean, again, I keep saying it that we've seen with Lewandowski and even Ter Stegen in that back line. I do cumble them all together, and I know that you on Twitter. I know this. You and I disagree about this a little bit, where the XG says that Barcelona should be giving up a lot more goals. Like 15 to 16 goals in the league is a lot. Is much more fair, but as faulty as it's been, the fact that Christensen has barely put a foot wrong for an entire season, the fact that Araujo has been who he is, the fact that Ter Stegen for at least 5 months was was excellent in net, making the save that he's supposed to make, and then Balde did take enough of steps forward defensively where you didn't worry too much about your left side, and then Kunde also had until the World Cup a good first half of the season defensively at least, and that is what has created Barcelona's, because even yesterday, I mean, can you criticize the fact that Barcelona? Well, that's what I mean. Like, can you criticize the fact that as bad as they were, Getafe had the two chances and they got
Two
lucky.
excellent chances. And look, whenever a Barcelona opponent can finish, they lose. It's
Yeah.
simple. Yeah. I mean, they have been incredibly lucky with opponent finishing this year. I mean, their X G against. I think all those X Gs and
Hmm.
Y Gs and F Qs. That's all right. But I mean, statistically, they give up great chances. And I don't know what kind of weird force field thing Ter Stegen has with that hair club off men thing he has going on, but it's working, right? Because I mean, opponents are shooting at the goal, and you think that's going in, and it goes wide, and you're like, what just happened?
But
I
Kevin,
mean,
you walked right into my trap because to the point about La Liga, this is the worst Barcelona team to win, or the worst team in the Liga to win the title in a while. That Courtois Benzema Real Madrid team that won the Liga in recent seasons, this is exact same thing. It was the exact same thing. Teams were so lucky or unlucky against Real Madrid that season. Courtois completely bailed them out. Benzema scored some early goals to help Real Madrid create distance in the table. This is a like for like. So if you want to criticize Barcelona in this juncture, it was that Barcelona that year were bad and Real Madrid had a goalkeeper and a striker. And this season, Barcelona have had a goalkeeper and a striker in the Liga, and they're going to win the league by potentially double digits because the other rivals to them started out the first 6 months absolutely garbage. And it's like
but,
the same story.
but Barcelona is worse because at least, and I hate Real Madrid. One,
Thanks for setting the table. Yep.
they know what they're doing, right? I mean, they know the whole swashbuckling thing. I will challenge even the most devoted Barcelona fan to pick one match and say that team looked like it knew what it was doing, right? I mean, you could say the first half of the Copa loss to Real Madrid, right? That was a good half of football. Um, they looked like they sort of had a clue, but it's been so rare. I mean, it's like, I mean, how do you still have Rafinha trying to beat people? Well, if you put my grandmother's urn on the pitch and said to Rafinha, beat that to score a goal, he'd be like, Durf, right? He'd lose the ball. It's just like, I mean, don't understand what Xavi wants to do with his team. And I don't think the team does either. And if you look at the tantrum number three that Rafinha had after being subbed off, I suspect some of it is because the players are frustrated as well. I mean, no one knows, you know, the players know when they're not playing good football. And, say what you want about Luis Enrique, say what you want about um, St. Guardiola, but they had structures that buoyed the team. So, those stretches when Messi would get hurt, the team kept going because they had a system in place. They had a way of playing. Xavi's team is just like, let's just go out there and kick the ball around and let's see what happens,
Mhm.
right? And then let's start hitting in crosses and inshallah, right? And it's awful to watch, and and all the people who say, oh, Xavi will come and it'll be pure football, and they'll start playing like Barcelona again. Yeah, what does that even mean? Because I mean, playing like Barcelona is like holding up a museum piece as a modern ideal. That time is gone. That team is gone. Busquets is a 1,000-year-old Hylon, right? I mean, they want to bring a 35-year-old Messi back for what? I mean, the biggest thing I think we've seen in the absence of Pedri is how far Gavi has yet to go to develop into a proper midfielder. Right? And I know people love him. He's got bottle for days. He has fight. He has fire, but he's not yet a truly good midfielder. And we've seen that in these recent matches without Pedri. So it's all a mess right now. And I mean, I just think this team is dire. They're shaping up to be dire next season as well.
Well, I think of what's missing from Barcelona. What is Xavi bringing back, right? What was that big question? And when I did those tactical breakdowns of what Xavi's ideas were, what he tried to and hoped to instill with Barcelona, again, was something that I think he has actually rather done successfully, and that is, as I had spoken about before, as far as the pressing actions per game, Barcelona's press. This is again like a caveat of how much blame we want to give to Xavi and how much blame we want to give to the financial situation and the personnel construction that has been created from, I mean, just years of mismanagement with a squad, right? That you and I have always agreed on those kind of things. But for what Xavi wanted to do was to bring back a press, and with the 7 times, I believe it's 6 or 7 times that he has had his Gala 11, like the 11 guys that he wants to start games for FC Barcelona. He has had them 6 or 7 times this season. And Barcelona, A, have won every one of those games. And B, I think the press looks excellent in every single one of those games, right? But because he is not, and this is to your point about should the whole squad that you have, so if you pluck one of those guys out of the Gala 11 and your press completely falls apart, that says that you're not instituting the right system, right? So that's like part of the blame that you put on Xavi, where you say, how can, I mean, even if you swapped out just Balde for Alba, there are games like that where you're like, well, now the press is, now there's room in behind the left back, and now
Yeah.
there's something wrong has gone with the press, right? And it seems like without the Gala 11, that press is not working. So it's frustrating because Xavi has the right ideas, but my questions for Xavi for next year come into play, even with to talk more specifically about Getafe, that left side, and for what next season might be, right? Where the decision to put Alba as the left back and Baldy as the left winger was a question mark, I think, from the start of the game. Where, I mean, it's a fair argument I mean, and you've been critical of the wingers, and everyone's been critical of the wingers. That I had a whole show about them with Domagoy on Thursday. That you throw your hands up, and Xavi probably did the same thing. It was like, well, if Ansu's pretty much already out the door, and I'll
Should
again
be.
plug the conspiracy theory I had last week that the medical reports that Barcelona and Ansu's camp have are worse than we think they are. We see it in the NBA all the time where a guy gets traded and you're like, wait a second, he only played like 2 more seasons in the NBA or whatever it was. And you're like, well, maybe that medical report when he got traded was worse than it was. But anyway, so that's Ansu, and then there's Ferran Torres. So then I think Xavi just kind of threw his hands up and said, all right, we'll start our best winger at that left wing, and that is Alejandro Balde this season. But the issue is that A, Balde was struggling with the offside trap, and B is that Alba wanted to push forward into that space to get himself into where he wants to hit those diagonal balls, that it was overlapping too much with Balde. And so Balde was completely redundant on that left side, and it had to be reversed because the minute Alba comes out of the game, Barcelona at least looked like they had a bit more work vertically, because it wasn't just Alba, it was Balde who was overlapping instead. And that was an issue that for Xavi he should have changed at halftime even. And you do have those major questions of him that you see something that didn't work, And again, puzzling why you made that decision from the start. But to add that to next season, why not say my questions for Xavi is that if the club is saying we have to bring Yannick Carrasco because you're not going to get a better player for 18 million and we have limited options and we kind of already agreed to it maybe with Atletico Madrid for some God knows reason, but you bring in Yannick Carrasco, who is very redundant in his inability to play a final ball, but just like Balde, he works hard, he can get forward, and you understand the what he does for the horizontal, again, the horizontal nature of Barcelona. But I mean, Carrasco is just, I mean, I guess he's the backup for Balde if you're getting rid of both Alba and Alonso, but you're not because you've already renewed Alonso. And if Alba doesn't take that pay reduction, then Alba's
And he
around.
won't.
Right.
He
And then
won't.
and now you have Carrasco as a left winger. And even if you get rid of Ansu and Ferran Torres, Yannick Carrasco does not solve your problems. Like, he's a good player. And again, I'm not trying to I can tell you 10 other teams that Yannick Carrasco would work on terrifically or who need Yannick Carrasco. But it seems like the way this team is constructed that Barcelona don't need Yannick Carrasco. And that is what's so puzzling about the way this team and Xavi is like constructing his team, where it's like, I made arguments for why the club is renewing Sergio Roberto. It had nothing to do with the field or talent, but you make the arguments. Same thing for Alonso, where you're like, okay, we might as well renew the guy that's sitting right there already for really low money because we can't afford to bring anybody in with FFP. Like, right, again, well, you can. I know you're shaking your head, but the point is, like, there's a rationale to why they're in the boardroom bringing these players back. Again, that has nothing to do with the field, right? So that's the argument for why these players are returning. But in the same regard,
Horrible. They're horrible. And so the problem is,
but I'm not
at
judging them on the
some
field.
point,
I'm judging, like, what is the club? Why is the club choosing financially to make those decisions? And again, I have the arguments for why they're choosing to make those decisions based on FFP and some of the other ideas
right,
they have, and that's why they're doing it. But my issue is that the players that you are going to bring in, meaning the slim margin of who is incoming. And that's the messy argument that Kevin I've had with other people, and I don't. I mean, you can say your piece, but I don't want to rehash that whole thing. I've already done it like 2 or 3 times the last few weeks. But who can you bring in? There's a slim margin of how you can reinforce the club and stay with FFP with the revenue that you're going to lose with moving stadiums, as you mentioned, next season. So those players cannot be a Yannick Carrasco who is not going to fit an absolute need. Like, you have to fit absolute needs with the 1 or 2 players that they're going to be able to spend. What I mean, at this point, it looks like 35 million total, right? Like,
yeah.
in the transfer market. So if you get 2 players for 35 million total, who are those players that fit needs as much as you can? I'm not asking for names, but I'm saying, like, that is what the club's objective needs to be. And my concern for Xavi right now is, like, that maybe I missed something with his vision, because he's been very clear about what his vision is. And I think when it's working, it makes sense. Like the Spanish Super Cup with his Gala 11, it makes sense when he has the 12 players he trusts and it's all clicking and it's all making sense. But the minute you go 13 through 18 or 13 through 21 with that roster, then Xavi's ideas fall apart because those players are not good enough to execute what he wants. So two things have to happen. Either Xavi has to become more flexible and adaptable to the crap he has on the bench and figure out how to make those players work, or the club has to, I mean, find a bag of money under somewhere, or things have to all work out so that they can actually bring in players that are 13 through 18 that can fulfill Xavi's very high expectations for the team that he wants, again, including that press. So that's not a defense of Xavi as much as it is that the club and Xavi have got to figure out what their vision is together. Because, as you mentioned, the concept is, I mean, the world that Barcelona fans are living in is that Barca's bench stinks because the club has put themselves in a financial issues with FFP over the course of years, not now, but in the past, so that their bench stinks and their bench might continue to stink. And so, can Xavi and how can you help Xavi get the most out of those players? And the only question for Xavi is, Xavi, does your system and does your ideas have the flexibility and ability? Because again, this is the inexperience point, right? Like, you say, Xavi isn't right. And my only concern and question is, this is like the silver lining of the Liga too. If a manager who is ill-equipped and too inexperienced to win games somehow stumbled his way into the Liga, that is optimism for me, because that means that he's going to gain experience and the Liga might give him the opportunity to gain that experience, as opposed to saying that he's just never going to be equipped for this job, because every manager is equipped until they lose games, and now they look completely ill-equipped, right? So it's like,
So I think that what people are forgetting, right, is, oh, Bartomeu killed the team, blah blah blah. But I mean, look, Porta, they bought Ferran Torres for almost 60 million. They bought Rafinha for 65. They brought in Lewandowski for 50, knowing that he was going to be one Dembele hamstring pull away from being completely ineffective. I mean, it's not like they didn't have opportunities to make the team better in meaningful ways, and they chose a different path. You know, people can say all they want about, oh, City didn't want to let Torres go. Yeah, they did because they had Julian Alvarez. Yeah, they did. Oh, Byron didn't want to let Lewandowski go. Yeah, they did. Because when a club wants to keep a player, they keep the player. Here's your money. Here's your playing time. Here's what you have requested from us to stay. Now go to your locker, right? In none of those cases did that happen. The problem right now is that Barcelona doesn't have anyone who can change a match, right? When you have the best players on the team sitting on the bench, in various walking casts, right? Pedri, Dembele, Christensen, and De Jong. Who's out there, right? And I just think that the team, the technical staff, has made errors. The team needs a DM, a right back, and a left winger, and that's it. And all this nonsense about bringing Messi back and all those vibes, he's going to be 36 years old. Come on. No, right? Not only that, but then, what happens to Gavi's development? And he needs that work. Pedri will be fine. He's in, then Young will be fine. There's now the rumor that Busquets wants to hang around now that Messi's coming back. For what? It's just like I think about many, many years ago, Washington Redskins were building a team of veterans, and their whole thing was veteran experience and veteran know-how, and we'll be fine. It turns out they were too old to do anything. Barcelona could have more 30 plus if Brozovic happens, if um, 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 Martinez happens.
Oh,
Um,
Inigo Martinez is going to happen. That was
yeah,
good.
so that's two more 30 plus players. You bring Messi, that's another 30 plus player. And those players, even if they don't start, they're one injury away from starting, which means that suddenly they're decisive, and they're decisive in ways that, and people can say, yeah, the club has no money, but they've still made stupid decisions with the money they've had.
Hmm.
And so I feel like, bringing in Xavi was a mistake. I mean, Xavi needed to be someone's assistant at a big league club somewhere. I don't think he's lost the dressing room, but when you have Rafinha repeatedly doing what he does when he's subbed off, there's something not right there. I think the the team is an implosion waiting to happen, and it breaks my heart to say that because as you know, I've been following them since '99. I've been blogging about them since the early 2000s.
Hmm.
I've been a soci now for 17 years. I mean, this team's in my heart, and it chills me to see all of this happening because it was preventable. There were about 5 or 6 points of inflection where, not to sound like some weird sci-fi film, right? Where Barcelona could have changed their future, and in every case they made the wrong decision. And so now they say, "Oh, we're going to rebuild this summer." With who? Cadavers? It frustrates me because I feel like the team could be better, but it's not well run, it's not well managed, and it's
Mhm.
not well assembled. And
Yeah.
and I don't know what'll happen in the summer, but I have no optimism that the right moves will be made in the summer either.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because even looking forward to next season, you look at the team and you go, okay, it can next season or will likely next season be a retread of what this season was, part two, and will you have the same success, particularly at the back, right? Because Araujo, I don't think is going to get any worse. He's going to miss 12 games next year, like he misses every year. Kunde is, I think, will rebound quite fantastically. I think the what we've seen for the last like 2 months in a is the good news is that I've been watching Koundé
Yeah.
since his Bordeaux days, and this is arguably like one of the most inconsistent 3 month stretches he's had. So I actually have quite a bit of faith that a summer for Koundé, getting some rest and then coming back renewed, will be very good for him. Christensen the same way that he's again been fantastic, and Balde has done. It's funny because I have in my notes here from Getafe. Balde's worst game? Question mark. Yes, Getafe was the worst game I saw Alejandro Balde play for the first team, which, if anything, actually still fills me with a bit of confidence in him and optimism because Xavi played him as a left winger next to Alba. So situationally, it was also the worst situation. He was set up to fail in that game, which again is a compliment to Balde because Alba comes off, Balde goes back to left back, and then the first touch after that, I was like, okay, yeah, it makes, you know what I mean? Like he finds himself. He's like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. This makes sense. I know where I am because I'm 19 years old and I only know so many places and so many things on the field, even though he did find it right back too. So, I'm very optimistic about Balde. And again, so the compliment for Barcelona going next season is that while Ter Stegen, again, the first 6 months of this season were as best as you're going to get of him, still Ter Stegen showed himself to be a top 10, top 5 goalkeeper in the world again throughout this season. And then again, you have Araujo, you have Kunde, you have Balde, and you have Christensen. So even if that, yes, I agree. Like I've been yelling about Hernan Martinez, and I'm going to do it until he's in Atletico Madrid uniform or he's in the Premier League, likely with City because obviously City Group owns Girona. So regardless of where Hernan Martinez pops up, I have said that yes, Barcelona would do wonders to bring in a player like that, especially one who can confidently invert as a pivot. Because again, the future of Barcelona is not through as we said, like a 1-for-1 4-3-3 defensive midfielder a la Busquets, who's going to
Yeah.
control a game like that. It's not. It's figuring. I mean, you look at the way Man City took down Bayern Munich. It is having the ability to adapt and to overload that midfield with players who are confident in building up as a pivot. And then how many can do that at that level, the top level, right? It's very limited number of players. It's
Yeah.
Kimmich. It's you know what I mean. Like the number is very low.
And Barcelona cannot afford none of them. I
Correct.
mean, you
So you have
know,
to figure out a way around it, though. So you have to build your system to again. So having Arna Martinez, a player who's confident to play as a pivot, next to Frankie De Jong, who is in. If you're still going to play that box four, whoever Xavi decides to set up next season, having you
Messi.
well, right, but having a right back who's able to come in next to Frankie De Jong is the optimal point. So it's like, is Frankie De Jong in build up in a 4-3-3 your lone defensive midfielder? Yes, but defensively he has help from the right back, and then you try to keep things as narrow as possible, right? And
She will need because because Frankie De Jong can't defend me. And so when you think of the idea of him as a DM, you know, and you wake up, with night sweats because he's just not, he, he's not a good defender. And
well,
the
wait,
thing
wait, wait.
about,
I don't know. I think he's not a good individual defender because I agree with you. He's not chasing somebody down in space. But I think when you look at his numbers, again, on the press, when Barcelona is pressing and Barcelona is defending on the front foot and Busquets is defending on the front foot and the ball retentions are fine because he's reading the game 30 yards from the opponent's goal as opposed to tracking back 70 yards. Like De Jong is very much a Barcelona player in that he defends well on the front foot in the system. Like his ball recoveries are always good, his interceptions are good. But you're right, in a 1v1 track down
can't
individual
defend.
fight, he's not doing that. So I agree with you. When Xavi requests De Jong to do too much and individually try to man mark, it all falls apart. When Barcelona press as a unit and it all works together, I think De Jong is a good system defender, but he's not a good individual defender. So that's my only like. I just want to stand up for De Jong a little bit in that
All
way.
right. So, but unless Barcelona has 98% possession, they're always going to be screwed, right? Because even at 2%, that's three attacks, and that's enough to get a couple of goals because maybe Stegen makes a stop, right? Maybe it bails you out. I don't know. But the fundamental difficulty that Barcelona has is it's always, well, when everything's perfect, it's wonderful, right? And everything is perfect for so little of a football match, and the rest of it is adaptations. It's 1v1. It's bailing out teammates. It's all marbles in a bowl. And, none of those, very few of those players out there have the ability to solve problems. Right? I mean, I will die on the hill that one of the most important players for those great Guardiola teams was Eric Abidal.
I see. I thought you were going to say Seydou Keita. I wanted to guess, but see,
No, I mean, because
yeah,
Abidal
figured
solved problems. He
hmm
solved problems. He solved um, problems from sideline to sideline. He could save PK. He could save Puyol. He saved Alves. Right, sideline to sideline. You know, Barcelona don't have a player like that who can solve problems. And modern football is athletic, it's pacey, it's powerful, it's dynamic, and it's technically skilled. And those five things mean that your opponent is going to create major imbalances that you have to solve. And there's one of two ways to solve those imbalances. Never let them happen, 98% possession, or have have athletes who can solve problems. For me, rather than throwing 18 million at Letty for Carrasco, I'd be throwing 18 million at Nice for Tadibo. Bring him back. Um, you've got a player with pace, with hop, or who can handle the ball, or who can bring the ball forward, because Lord knows right now nobody can. I mean, you've got a player who solves many problems. He also gives the back line depth. He can also play as a fullback, preferably a right back, because then you have Kunde and Arujo as your center backs. It's just like, I mean, it frustrates me when I think of all the things the team could do that they won't,
hmm
because they'll be too busy, trying to save money by throwing it away on stupid things. I mean, I love Inigo Martinez as a defender, not at Barcelona. Um, I think that Carrasco was good for about 14.2 seconds. Um, Messi, I've discussed at length. I just think it's the wrong move. They're doing everything wrong. And next year they'll have a roster packed with 30-year-old
yeah.
players. Lewandowski will be 35. He's already showing signs right now of why Bayern let him go.
Well, I mean, I think that's the idea, right? For the transfers, like if you're going to bring in a 30-year-old, you have to basically make sure you're getting rid of a 30-year-old. It doesn't sound like that's happening. Because
Yeah.
like for the example of like Gundogan, where it's like Gundogan, I think even at 33, what he still does at a very, very high level, I think is partly what Barcelona needs. Like he can help them control a game, and they just don't have players to do that competently. And he's a player that still does that at a very high level. So to me, bringing him in, it's going to be a 3-year deal. You'd hope, but likely he'd sign a 5-year deal, right? Like he wouldn't sign anything less than 4-year. But like in theory, that's only a 2-year deal because he's a bridge to something else. But that means that someone has to see the door, right? And none of those 30-year-olds are likely going to see the door. So then
No.
then don't bring in Gundogan, right? But Gundogan does solve problems, and I think that's again one of the natures of Barcelona. Now, last thing to do in the show here is quickly Laporta's press conference, and I say quickly here because I know where you stand on this, and so I'm kind of going to set the table for you, and then you can whatever you have to add, you can add. But I know I'm going to upset a lot of Kool-Aids here, or some Kool-Aids, but I don't think we learned a single thing from that press conference, but I also don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I'm not being critical of Laporta when I say that. I'm saying that we knew what Barcelona's defense is when it comes to reports. Like, the news that the prosecutor's office was having trouble putting together substantial evidence based on said reports, that information coming out a few weeks ago, that to me was 10 times more necessary or influential to how this case would be viewed in the public opinion more than this Laporta press conference. And if I was Laporta, I would literally just have said that the prosecutor's evidence, which he did, but I'm saying that's all I would have said. Like, the prosecutor's office is having trouble compiling enough evidence. I would have just gone into the legalese of it. Like, he's a lawyer. Like, for Laporta is a lawyer. Like, as far as like going about it that way, and I would have presented it like that. I would have bored the people, the socios and the reporters. I would have bored them to death with the legalese of it, because it's true. Like, when I broke down with Mike Patreon Mike Cribbins, and I did a whole YouTube video for 20 minutes. I did the 55-minute, like, again, the legal case of this argument was that Barcelona as an entity, they had to prove that there was intent of the crime of sports corruption. And it seems like at this point, with the reports the way that they are, and I know that he went and he put him up like that, but it seems to be that Barcelona, whether there was some kind of negligence to it that we can get into, but it continues to be that Barcelona's very reasonable and justified position is that, especially again when you remember the nature of the wrongdoing, or any wrongdoing on Barcelona's part, does have to come from intent. And again, it's not looking like that is the case. It looks like Barcelona had 14 years of stupidity, and more impressively, the previous board from 2014 to 2018, which is what is being like litigated. That period under scrutiny, again, there was, as we know, abject stupidity and ignorance at the club. So I think the biggest issue to me with Laporta's press conference was, I think, talking about Real Madrid, or talking about this case through the lens of victimhood, with like through the lens of Real Madrid's power in the Liga, I think is the biggest misstep, because again, it is looking like there will not be enough evidence to prove that Barcelona, the entity, committed the crime of sports punishment. And that's all, as a Kool-Aid, I wanted to hear from that press conference, because that's all I needed to hear, right? Because if Barcelona, the entity, are considered, not guilty of the crime of sports punishment, then that's all we need to know. Like, and I understand the desire that Laporta has to want to change public perception, or at least give confidence to socios that Barcelona are fighting back against those who damage their reputation. But I think at this moment, you allow the legal system and you allow the prosecutor's office to do that heavy lifting for you. As I said, like, when the prosecutor's office revealed that the evidence that they were trying to compile in those reports was not enough, and they're like, why did this idiot club spend 7 million plus on these reports? These aren't worth 7 million. Like, that is actually Barcelona's argument. Like, this is one of those Barcelona, like, there's a great story I heard about a NFL player, about an NFL player who was like, he in practice he kept hurting a teammate, and the teammate was like, "You got to stop hurting me, man. Like, either you're like the meanest, worst teammate I have, or you're just plain stupid." And he responds, "I'm just plain stupid." And at this point, like, that's actually the Barcelona argument, because that is what it is. It's like, we were ignorant, we were negligent, and these reports didn't help as much as we wanted them to. But over the course of 14 years, we spent 7 million, which does only equal like 400,000 every whatever, which again is only like 1.3 more than what other clubs are spending over the same amount of time, right? So there is like precedent of, like, you have to learn about what were other clubs spending, who were the other clubs getting work from. Like, again, Negreira himself, sure, but Negreira's son was connected to a ton of other clubs with reports and things like this. Like, he had worked for the Liga, like, so it's like there you have to understand the case, learn the case. But again, I think Laporta kind of gave an out to all those naysayers by talking about Tebas, by talking about Real Madrid. Again, just say, look at what the prosecutor's office is reporting, like, or what reports coming from the prosecutor's office. Look at the lack of substantial evidence that is coming forward at this point. Like, again, because like, Mike Crimmins and I said it, the prosecutor's office wouldn't bring this case to, or try to even bring this case, especially to trial, but to try to have this case public, if they did not have substantial evidence. Like, it does not make sense legally for the prosecutor's office to do that. However, it seems like the prosecutor's office, just like everything else, it seems like in the Spanish court system, does things willy-nilly and doesn't know what they're doing either, right? So, like, it's totally fair for me to be like, well, the prosecutor's office didn't know what they were doing either, and no one knew anything, and no one knows anything. There's this world where 100 wrongs don't make a right. Prosecutor's office seems like a little ignorant, doesn't know what they're doing. Tebas, I mean, it's absolutely just shooting himself in the face, right? Irrespective of Barcelona, just shooting himself and the Liga in the face over and over and over again, irrespective of the issues that Barcelona have had, because Barcelona again got themselves into this mess in part by again years of mismanagement through the Bartomeu regime. As I mean, dating all the way back to Nunez. I mean, you want some history? Look at the fight between Alexanko and who was at the time the president in yeah, it was Nunez, right? I'm like my brain's fried. Yeah, it was anyway. 1988. There was an issue. I mean, it's what led to Bernd Schuster leaving, and it dated all the way back to what I had referenced a few weeks ago with Keeney getting kidnapped. Like there was mismanagement all throughout the 80s as well. Like Barcelona has a way of attracting this kind of drama, attracting this kind of news. That's what you sign up for when you're Kool-Aid. But Barcelona always kind of does come out on the other side of it. Not to say untouched, but they're fine. Like that's what it is. So just look at what is actually coming out of this court case and the legal parts of it, because that is what's good news for Barcelona, and that's all the optimist should take from Laporta's press conference, because the rest of it is just filler. And I know Kevin, you're going to respond to the filler.
So Laporta's not a good president, and I don't know how good of a lawyer he is, but judging from the evidence of what we've seen of him at podiums, look, I mean, Laporta is a politician and he's a dancer. Turn the lights on, he starts shimmying. Whether he should or not is so. The club can't say we were stupid. For 17 years, we were stupid, right?
Of course.
We, we got what's the line in Malcolm X, and we got hoodwinked, we got bamboozled, right? The club can't say that. So what do you say, right? And you turn it into theater. You turn it into victimhood. You turn it into they're trying to sully our shimmering white samite. And that is all to distract you from the very clear evidence of these people were morons. And for 17 years, over many administrations, they were morons. And while the Bartomeu regime wrote the book on being morons. The next excellent president that FC Barcelona has will be the first one, right? Look, Porta did exactly what people who know him knew he was going to do, right? Wrap himself in patriotism, wrap himself in, oh, they're attacking our beloved institution. They're trying to sully us. They're trying to bring us down. As you know, they're not doing anything of the sort. The only hope this case had was public opinion. Right? That was the only hope this case had, because anybody who looked at it, even the most perfunctory manner, was like, there's nothing here except a club being taken by people promising them something nebulous that was of no value.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a consultant to tell you X or Y official is a jackass. You don't need that. So, what are you paying for? So, I think that Laporta's press conference was a major success, right, in the sense that it got people talking about him. It got more gullible supporters to say, yeah, right, they're messing with our club. But it was also a mess in that it had him doing this song and dance to hide the fact that he and everybody else were, for 17 years, morons. And yes, in the overall scheme of things, 400K a year or whatever, how much it was per year, is no money. But what it represents is just this just stupendous stupidity. And nobody at the club wants to say, you know what, we were stupid. And to me, if he is the transparent, fully honest, above board president that he, walked in claiming to be, right? Let's not I forget. He walked in talking about transparency and accountability, blah, 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 right? If he's that guy, he walks up to that podium and says, I've looked at these reports. I've looked at 17 years worth of what we got for our money. And you know what? We got hoodwinked. We got bamboozled. We got taken
Mm.
for a ride.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about that. And it wasn't much of your money, right? You, the members who ostensibly own this club, but we got taken. And I'm bummed about that. We didn't do anything wrong, which the prosecutors' lack of evidence cites, but there is evidence that we were stupid and
Hmm.
we feel bad about it. Thank you. Any questions? It's the press conference, right? It's not this like, you know, nail me to a Senora cross, oh God, they're coming at Barcelona. That's wrong. But that worked to the people it would work for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The right thing he was never going to do, which is taken. We feel bad about it. Sorry, right? Never going to happen. Should have happened? Yes. Never going to happen because that's not how he is, and that's not what he need. That's not what the people who love him need him to be.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting because like the identity of the club, and the flip that I've obviously has happened in the court of public opinion, if you will, and I don't we can have a research paper on how social media has changed these things too, both in Catalonia and then internationally as well, right? And so like the victimhood that Laporta is tying into is at the very identity, the nature of the club. Like the club was a victim of, I mean, just awful oppression, like the club itself and the people who were associated with that club. I mean, you read about, we'll say, one of the great presidents that Barcelona did have in Juan Camper, and his life ended because of said oppression, right? And and so you look historically. I mean, Barcelona had a president, Sunyol, in 1935, assassinated for being
Yeah.
connected to FC Barcelona. Like there was oppression throughout their history. Again, even the lack of consideration, as I was researching the Kini kidnapping, right? The lack of consideration that the Madrid government at the time, again, this is in the post-Franco regime even, but the lack of help and the incompetence of the policia at the time, the federal troop, as opposed to just like the Catalan police policia, the lack of federal considerations that a Barcelona player, like a La Liga player, like a goal scorer, like the Pichichi winner, was kidnapped for almost a month, and the lack of care and consideration from the federal government at that time was like, again, this is in the 80s post Franco, where there's a clear there are clear representations of oppression throughout Barcelona's history. Yes, unfortunately, once Pep Guardiola won 6 trophies in one season in the court of public opinion, that all flipped, right? And so I always have a hard time with this, Kevin, because it's like it's like I almost find myself like a dog like chasing its tail, where I go, I know, I know, because you know the same thing. I know the history of the club that I support. So I know that oppression is in its very identity, and that is true, and that is real. But there is frustration for me when the club cries for oppression when in the instances where there is none. And I have a hard time with cases like this because Laporta is correct about something, and that is that Barcelona and Real, and I think clubs in Spain, of what I see, are all kind of culpable of this in some way. That they don't really understand yet how to deal with heavy like public scrutiny, not even from their own supporters, but just like from a national regard. Like it was like how Real Betis under Pellegrini a few years ago, like were just tremendous, but then they kind of flew too close to the sun, right? And they were pushing for Champions League, and then the minute they started to be scrutinized, they went on a run of like awful form because they just like seemed to crumble the minute they were like a good team who was struggling, as opposed to just being a team that was just making everybody happy by exceeding expectations, right? And it seems like a lot of Spanish clubs do that because it's true. Like the press in Spain is full of misinformation. It's absolute nonsense, and like it is the case even you and I on social media, where you have to go, wait a second, was that Diario? Was that Sport? Was that Monday? Like you have to make sure you're sourcing it. And again, you and I are both American born. So it's also like for me, being in the US, that's just a big part of just my daily life. But if you're living in places that will say have an actual like truthful and free press where you can go to places that you trust, and I think globally we have our own issues, and that's a totally different thing for another hour of a podcast. But if you know where you're going and or at least where where to trust to find the messages that you're looking for, then you can find your corner of the sky. But by and large, I think a lot of the top teams in world football can no longer cry for victimhood. However, again, Barcelona, I think financially, or not even financially, I mean, so the thing that Laporta, again, to kind of take what he said and kind of take it down a little bit, where his whole thing about financially, Barcelona are going to get what's coming to them because of those that have slandered their name. What is true is that Barcelona potentially did lose revenue because of this court case going to the lengths that it did if there was no substantial evidence. And like legally, that is a case that Barcelona has, but that is not a case that has fully been put together just yet. And I think that is the other issue that I mean, again, as I had mentioned, my frustration with that Negreira case was it took me a week to go through it. It took me a week to talk to 3 different lawyers, and American lawyers who I asked out of the kindness of their hearts to look at Spanish law to try to help me figure this out and get to the bottom of what is like actually happening in this case. It took me a week to do that. But 3 days is all it took for social media to decide who was guilty, who was right, and it had already the Port of
One
had
day,
already
one
one
day,
day, right? Well, yeah, one day. I mean,
one
so
day.
it took one day for it to be already decided that this whole thing was over. But these things take a lot of time, and it's just I feel a part of me does feel like Laporta. I know everyone's like, oh, he needs to speak, but we already know what Barcelona didn't do wrong, and just keep that in your mind. Like that's okay. Like they're not going to be convicted of a crime of sports punishment because agreed. Like those reports are nothing. So for Laporta, I just wish he kind of hadn't said anything because I think that
I mean,
actually like because the defense is already set out for Barcelona, right? So just if they decide you're guilty in one day, they can also decide or choose to decide you're not guilty in one day too. Because the people who are going to believe that Barca aren't guilty will believe that. And those who want Barcelona to be guilty will always believe that Barcelona will be guilty. It takes them an hour to decide that without any information whatsoever. So as much as like I know it's tough to say,
that's
but
it.
as a Kool-Aid, just let it roll off. Like the best time in Barcelona's history is when they took that criticism and took that garbage and just let it roll off and care about your own business.
That's never going to happen. I mean, look, you know, when this was all bubbling up, and people were saying, "Oh, the big Barca accounts are being quiet about this. Why are they being quiet?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a very big Barca account, but for me as a journalist, I don't see anything that warrants this kind of scrutiny. It seems to me they paid someone for something this person could not have possibly delivered for
Mhm.
17 years.
Right.
And so while I think that makes them a bunch of morons, I don't think it is in any way illegal. I think it is certainly, you could say it reeks of a conflict of interest, but Spanish football,
It is a conflict of interest. Yes, everybody
you could
is.
talk a loogie and, conflict of interest, right? So for me, I was like, this seems like a nothing burger to me. And as you know, people who want the club to be guilty of something, they'll be guilty. People who want to support, love, and defend the club, and it's those people who Big John did his dog and pony show for today. Those people say, "Oh yeah, right. Our president has stormed the ramparts. Our president is fighting for the club, right?" So that's why I say that press conference was a success, um, but also an abject failure at the same time. And in many ways, that's Porta, right? He is the guy who, hey, yeah, we lost, but let's have cop, right? I mean, he's the right president for the club right now.
Yep, I agree.
I don't think, I mean, as much as I liked Font and would have voted for him, I mean, I don't know that he would have been the right president for all this crap. You know,
Yeah,
then
I
again,
agree.
maybe
I think you
I
and I
think
mentioned it. I think Barcelona needed a cult of personality, and they got it in Laporta
yes, yeah,
for all of his flaws and issues. And I think you're right. Like I think the next president is the president that they would want to, kind of not say there are no ashes to rise out of, but to bring a stability and a consistency
to
that you
actually
would,
run the club,
yes, that you
to
would actually be.
actually run the club.
But I agree. I think Laporta was a cult of personality this team has, because he, again, in those assemblies, he makes the, hey, we have to play in Montjuic for a year so that we can redo the Camp Nou, and here's all the numbers. Like, a president without a cult of personality is not going to be able to get that over the
Yeah.
line, even if it's the right choice. Because again, like, just look at the numbers, the revenue that will be, that, like, Barcelona does fill up the gate. Like, that's what they do. Like, 85,000 people come to Barcelona and tourists and whatever. Like, the numbers say that Barcelona at the gate can be a very successful and will be a very successful club no matter what. Again, number one in Europe in attendance right now.
Now
So
if they
just,
don't suck.
well, but even when they did, it was still 38,000, 45,000 on the regular. And so, right. So they just have to just be competent on the field, and 80,000 people will show up, which again is I think a privilege that a lot of clubs don't. I mean, almost no clubs have. So, like, they won the Liga behind 85,000 people. Now they're going to redo the stadium. It's going to take a little knock, and you just have to make sure you can basically survive and do what Xavi's teams do best and suffer next season long enough where you're successful enough the following year to return to the club. I mean, to return to the Camp Nou with 105,000 people, or 100,000 people week in and week out, hopefully, and then do your winning on the back of all that glory and success. And I think so. There is this. The last thing I'll say is that there is this path forward of optimism for Barcelona, but they are walking and continue to walk this tightrope. And the reason why, when Messi left and everything with Bartomeu, it was so cataclysmic for the club, for supporters. Like, there are so many supporters that left and did not come back because the tightrope that Barcelona, like, I knew it that day. I remember saying to my wife, should I keep doing the pod? Should I keep doing everything? Because I felt like this means that, again, I'm talking about like the Bartomeu time. This means that the club is going to be walking a tightrope, financial tightrope, and a tightrope in terms of even results from day to day. That's why you and I are talking about Getafe as if the Camp Nou is closing up, just because every result on this tightrope feels like Xavi isn't the right guy, or the club is financially only going to spend, is going to spend on the wrong guys, and they're not going to win any trophies next season. And it's just like it's so close for Barcelona to fall off that tightrope. And I just feel like it's one step after another, and it's tough because we have to litigate every single decision along the way. Which, again, like, Montjuic stinks for revenue and means that Barcelona have got to get those transfers, those one or two transfers, absolutely correct. But then
And they
again,
won't.
right, all right.
We
Well,
won't. We know
I
they
think,
won't.
all right. Well, yeah, I know. That's why I'm talking about. That's why I just hope they listen to me sometimes. That's why I talk about Ana Martinez every chance I get. I wake up, I eat my banana, I share it with my puppy, and I say, "What do you think about Ana Martinez, Colby?" And Colby goes, "Well, I love banana, but Ana Martinez sounds pretty nice too." And I'm going to keep doing it until he's playing Atletico Madrid. But all right. Anyway, Kevin, a pleasure as always. We managed to go over an hour again, as expected. No 5 headlines, so at least we gave something. Kool-Aid's out there, something to enjoy and listen to. But yeah, in retirement. I guess not much to plug other than your Twitter, right?
No, yeah, I'm just chilling out, learning Portuguese, riding my bike, playing in the sun, and having a good life. It's awesome.
It is awesome. So that's what I wish the same thing for all Kool-Aids out there. Now, I mean, hopefully you retire as soon as Kevin got to. But anyway, so we're on Twitter and Instagram as well. Well, Kevin is on Twitter. Follow him down in the show notes below. And then we're TikTok as well, close Facebook group, Patreon, merch store. You know where to find us. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Before Sparks.